presenters done speaking, we'll have questions at the end. And then afterwards, we'll do the World Cafe reflections. We're all good? Okay. The first speaker is Latifa. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Are you here? Online? You are not here online. Okay. Belinda?
I'm here. I'm online.
All right. Can you please start for us, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
I hope you can all hear me and see my slides as well. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you online also. Thank you.
Great. So thank you. My name is Belinda Ngwinbobo Banuenoma, and I'm a student, a PhD student of University of Ghana. And today I'm here to present to you Doorways of Entry and Autoethnographic Reflection on a postgraduate researcher's experiences in gaining access to the field. So this is actually a piece that is birthed from my search for cases for my main PhD thesis. And so in seeking out cases, these were some of the reflections, and I'm excited to share with you. So as a child growing up in Kumasi, I come from the northern part of Ghana. I grew up in the south. I'm the first girl of my siblings, my parents, and the only girl and the first child. So we did definitely have some gender roles at home. And when people encountered me and found that I was from the north, they automatically thought that I was a Muslim. And those that thought I wasn't Muslim thought I was Catholic. Then in town, whenever I went to the market with my mom, I'd meet a lot of head porters. And these head porters come from the northern part of Ghana. People would treat us so nicely, especially the traders, but treat them harshly. And as a child, I always wondered what was going on. Why did, especially because sometimes we meet people, girls from the Upper West region, specifically from the Dagaba ethnic group who speak my language. And then I wonder why they treat them differently and treat me differently. So there were times that I thought, well, maybe it's because my mom is speaking only English, and so she's educated and the others aren't. But I encounter them, and some of them speak perfect English because they have high school education. And one time I concluded, well, maybe it's also because my mom has the money to buy and they don't. And so they are treating us nicely and they are not treating them nicely because of that. And even though I could not reconcile all of these questions, they were still at the back of my mind every time I had encounters with people that brought forth my identity issues. So in Ghana generally, education is highly class-based. And it's also very gendered. Now, the gap between male and female access is being bridged. However, the majority of those who have access are those who are, especially for females, well-to-do or coming from well-to-do homes. And the location of educational institutions, whether high schools or universities, also contribute to the access that people have. So the location of the schools, as well as the location of the students who are accessing these institutions. So if you take high school education in Ghana, for instance, we have the first high school in Fansipim School established in 1876 and Tamale Secondary School established in 1951. So a huge gap of about 55 to 56 years between these two. And then university education, the first being University of Ghana, established in 1948, and University of Development Studies in the North, established in 1992, also a gap between the North and the South. So there's a thing, we have what we call the North-South divide, where we consider the northern sector and then the southern sector. There are huge differences in the climatic conditions, the weather conditions in the north and in the south having more conducive conditions for crops. And we also have a colonial legacy. During the colonial times, the South was reserved for plantations and mining, and because the coast was also in the South, a lot of activities went on in the South, while the North was reserved as a hub for recruiting labor for the mines and the plantations in the South. However, years after colonialism, this trend still continues. We have a lot of people migrating from the North to the South to look for work or so-called greener pastures. And so we have more poverty in the North, and the wealth distribution of the country is more centered in the South. And so with this as a background, I am looking at my own ethnicity as a Dagao from the Upper West region of the northern part of Ghana, my gender as a female, and as a postgraduate student who lived in the South and schooled all my life in the South. And this is what Hill Collins refers to as intersectional identities, and Bukamal as your positionality as a researcher going into the field. So as I indicated earlier, this research is really my experiences as I was searching for cases for my main PhD work. And this PhD work is based on looking at farmer-based organizations who own collective land. And based on the arrangements within these lands, I'm interested in finding out what the implications are for marginalized groups within these groups. So looking at women, looking at youth, looking at people living with disability and other marginalized groups, migrants as well. And so in searching for cases, I'm reflecting now on what constituted the activities of my field experience, what were the factors that influenced my access to the field, and what are the implications of my field experience for me as a researcher, and also for my research as I begin my main data collection soon in November. So generally, in going into the field, we all have our fields of study. Social science research, you have different departments, but all of us, even within the same department, will be looking at different things. As somebody studying a sociology department, some people may be looking at sociology of the body, others are looking at cultures, cultural practices. So we all have specific fields that we go into, and to go into a field, you have to begin with arrangements that will facilitate the process for you. But all of these come up in different stages, and these stages are not linear. Even though they are distinct, they are not linear. It's a whole process, and you can shift. It's iterative, just as the research process itself is. You will come across participants, some as gatekeepers, who would either restrict or enable your access, and the informants who would give you access to the information. It all comes with challenges. Challenges with you as a researcher, challenges you may face on the field as you encounter the participants, and you would have to come up with different strategies to be able to counter these challenges. And so for someone looking for farmer-based organizations, I had to understand a bit of the FBO space, especially within Ghana. And I found that generally FBOs cut across various sectors. And it is generally a term that is used for farmer groups, cooperatives, farmer associations. NGOs and other government institutions also fall under farmer-based organizations, especially those that, but I was interested in looking at the FBOs that are into production, who own a collective land, and the implications of these arrangements on tenure arrangement and on land tenure for marginalized groups. And so to help me do this, I'm using autoethnography, because autoethnography is an approach that allows especially societies or individuals that have been studied or by others for so long. So you can take, as we are talking about decolonizing methodologies or Afrocentric methodologies, autoethnography allows us, especially as Africans who have been studied in anthropology by ethnographers for so long, to also, turn the focus onto ourselves, to tell our own stories, and to project from our own perspectives. And so, using the self, I am considering myself as an African who has been studied for so long, and so I get to do this for myself. I think of the self also as a researcher, because traditionally, the researcher is supposed to be silent and neutral. And so in this sense, I center myself as a researcher. And also the self on another level for me, maybe personally, is also that as a Northern female, I have been studied for so long. The Northern female has been studied as headquarters, as women who do not have access to land. And so as a researcher centering myself, I also get to represent that category of the studied or the other. And so I use a lot of reflexivity through reflective journaling, a lot of self-interviews, my emotions, the frustrations that come, my encounters with people, why they ask me certain questions, how I'm showing up, a lot of copious notes from the field, and then observations. And so to analyze, I use the themes that run through my encounters with various people and at different levels, and my own reflections on the interactions that I had with all these different people. Ethical considerations, the most important one for me in this one was anonymity, because I'm looking at my own experiences, but vis-a-vis people that I encountered on the field. And so I had to anonymize all of them. And then to help me make a sense of all of these experiences, I'm employing the taxonomic model by Dahlstrom and Guttormson, who talk about access to the field, and they give various stages, even though they are intertwined. So we have the physical dimension, which talks about your physical entry or access into the field. There's intersubjectivity, which is more about how the people view you, your background, your positionality as a researcher. The administrative dimension has to do with all the activities you engage in to facilitate the process. And the interpersonal dimension is more about how you interact with the participants. So the activities that characterize my field experience were largely establishing contact, because I was looking for a specific kind of farmer-based organization. And many people, in fact, from the beginning, people were saying, well, are you sure this even exists in Ghana? So the search was so much so that I had to contact strangers, family, friends, just ask. I was just talking about what I was looking for everywhere, through emails, social media. I used formal means, informal means, did note taking. And then when I found a few cases that I thought could be potential cases, and I decided to go and meet them in person to verify all the bookings of accommodation and transportation, all of that formed part of the activities on the field. And so by the time I finally found cases, I had spoken to about 55 different farmer-based organizations that cut across the different categories of farmer-based organizations I spoke on earlier. So what were some of the factors that influenced my access? I categorized them into two different factors, the enabling and the limiting factors. So for the enabling factors, one of the major ones was their understanding of research. So people who understood research were largely enthusiastic about engaging me. And for some of them, especially about the topic that I had in mind, they even gave me ideas and areas to focus on. For some of them, it was just a joy to find that, well, I have all this knowledge and there's somebody who wants to investigate this, then I'm willing to support them. The second one was their perception of my identity. And so for my identity, I looked at people considered my educational level. For some of them, they gave me some form of respect because, oh, wow, you're doing a PhD. So yeah, I'm willing to talk to you. If they are not available, they reschedule with me. They are willing to give me every information I need or link me up with somebody else, just because they think, okay, well, a PhD, you deserve all the support or the respect, because that's how they see that level. Then for others, it was my ethnicity. So when I mentioned my name, some people had to say, oh, you're a Dagao, right? Or you come from the Upper West, I think. So whenever I encounter people like that, they are always willing to talk to me because of my ethnicity. And there was even one who linked me up with somebody and introduced me as his sister. He doesn't know me from anywhere. He had never heard of me, but he didn't have the information I needed. Just because he knew I was a Dagao because of my name, he was willing to support me and even introduce me as though I were related to him. For others, it was my gender. There was this woman who was just so proud. Wow, a woman doing a PhD, she's willing to support me. She linked me up with all the people she knew, and she would call from time to time to check whether I had found a case that would fit what I was looking for. Then location was also one of them. For some of the farmers I spoke to, once they found out that I was calling them from Accra, or I was coming from Accra, well, that's the seat of government. So, well, I want to engage you, but just make sure that this part of what I'm telling you, you take it to the government because we have problems and we need them to come and solve it. So the fact that they thought I was coming from Accra meant that they were willing to engage because they thought, well, when I go back, I may be able to forward their grievances to the government. Another enabling factor for me was language. And being able to speak English facilitated the process for my engagement with the government institutions, the NGOs, agribusiness owners, in extension offices, and sending emails, messages on social media and all that. And then for some of the farmers and other organizations at the local level, my ability to speak Twi, which is a southern language, also helped, and my ability to speak Dagari, which is also a northern language, also facilitated the process. And then my relationship with the initial contact. So when I called some people, for instance, the extension officers, and told them, oh, I got a list from the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and then you were one of the extension officers. So I wanted to call to, tell you about the research I'm doing and how you could help me find farmer-based organizations in your district to be able to. And so that gave them, for the fact that I found their name on a list given by the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, meant, okay, this is coming from a credible source. For others, for the farmer groups, when I mentioned the name of the extension officer, they said, oh yeah, we know him, we work with him, he comes around to help us do ABC. And so they were also willing, it's also established some form of credibility, and they were willing to engage me. Some of the limiting factors were also their understanding of research. For some who understood research, they knew that I would have to come to them to conduct interviews. I have to come, if it's a questionnaire, they have to take time and go through it. They felt, okay, you're going to take my time, but I'm super busy. So it's either they delegate or they tell me to go and look for another organization altogether because they will not have the time for me. And so that means on that front, I couldn't move past those gatekeepers. Then for others, it was also their expectations of me. So when I introduced myself and said, I'm doing a PhD, for instance, this NGO woman felt that as a PhD candidate doing research, I have a lot of money. And so when she was asking what is in it for them initially, I thought she meant what's the importance of my research and how is it going to benefit them, but she actually meant money. And so as a gatekeeper, she wasn't willing to introduce me to any farmer-based organization, even if they would fit the cases I'm looking for, because she wanted money for herself and also for the people. She wasn't just talking about them, even though she said what is in it for them. So another limiting factor was language. So yes, I could speak English, Twi, Dagari, but I went to some communities and usually I would go with a translator. But one day I was told in one of the communities, oh, don't worry, there's a teacher there who teaches in another community, but he lives in the community you're going to, who speaks English. And so you should be fine. But I went and he wasn't there. They didn't understand my English, they didn't understand my Twi, my Dagari. And so I had the physical access to them, but I could not get any information from them. So I had to go back the following day with my translator and my research assistant who was able to help. And appearance was one of the things. So in one of the communities I entered, I had a cold that day and the road was so dusty. So I put on a mask and then I forgot to take off my mask when I got there. But I also thought, well, I have a cold. And that was a problem because for some of the women, they said, oh, we don't see her face. We don't know who this is. So I realized how you appear when you go to the field matters a lot to in facilitating the process of getting your case, for me, my cases or conducting research. So what are the implications for me and my research? That I should definitely have the awareness of the existence of doorways. And of course, I use doorways to represent the numerous ways or different elements that come to play in facilitating my access to the field. Some of the doorways allowed me entry, others didn't. But in areas where they allowed me in, some of them I did not even realize could be potential factors that would facilitate the process. So doorways such as, yes, my ethnicity, or doorways such as my educational level and the expectations of me and all that. And the consciousness of power dynamics, which is super important because I realized there were times that the power was with me as a researcher, especially when you go to the local level and meet the farmers. Oh, madam is here. Oh, let's, engage her. Let's help her. Let's make her comfortable. But when you go to the NGOs, you go to the government institutions, they just see as a student, don't come and waste our time, we are busy. And so it shifts. As a researcher, these are some of the things that I should bear in mind as I go into the field for my main data collection. And then I should know when to let go. Like that NGO lady who led me on, we had like 4 different sessions of phone calls, but I had no idea initially that it was simply because she was speaking in a coded language that I didn't understand until eventually she came out clear and I had to let go. Which also means for my research that ethical considerations should be something that I factor into the whole process as I go into the field, especially because of the consciousness of power dynamics, and especially as I engage those at the local level, because these are the target group, these are the people I'm going to be working with. Do they fully understand? Like the woman who says, oh, you are in Accra, coming from Accra, so let me emphasize on this, so you tell the government. If I told her I was coming from a different region, for instance, would she have been willing to engage me? So I'm thinking about all of these things as I prepare to go to the field, because if we say informed consent, she may have said yes, but did she really say yes if I think of the reason behind her agreeing to engage me? And the timelines, it took me quite a number of months, about 5 to 6 months, to eventually find cases that I wanted to work with based on what I was investigating. And so going into the field, I should factor in all of these. So generally, the factors influencing access, they are definitely interconnected as much as the stages themselves within the research process. And I bear that in mind now because of the preliminary investigation I have done and the cases I have found, and that the gatekeepers are super important and that there are levels. So initially I thought, oh, I got the list so I can speak to an extension officer and then he leads me, but you speak to the extension officer who gives you a case, a farmer-based organization, but the organizations themselves also have to decide, and there are leaders, and there's a chief in the community, and there are various levels of gatekeeping, and I have to bear that in mind as I go into the field. Language is a gatekeeper. This is more clear to me now based on the experience I have had, and it was an enabling factor in many instances, but also in others, a limiting factor. And then I should allow the research to lead as I go into the field, because I can't control everything, bearing in mind there are power dynamics. Power dynamics are super important. And also because we are talking, we've been the ones being studied for so long, as we are studying ourselves, we should ensure that we do not exploit ourselves or one another, especially as researchers who have the power when we go to the local communities. And then to ask questions for feedback, again, informed consent, and the certainty of the participants understands what it is that I am communicating throughout the process. And for them to know they are not obliged in any way is something I'm bearing in mind as I am going to the field. And so to conclude, the field access is a combination of factors, and they are definitely intertwined. That has been my experience. There are multiple doorways. I should make use of the ones that facilitate the process. But as I reflect on all of these, especially with my own biases, this experience of this autoethnographic reflection has helped me to bear all of these in mind as I go, the intersectional identities. And I think of it as the questions that bogged my mind as a child about why they don't treat me this way, why I think I'm equal to this person, but I'm treated differently, nicely and she harshly, have all been resolved now that I go into the field as a researcher doing a PhD. It is basically my intersectional identities that have worked together to shape the unique experiences that I had then as a child. And most often it's worked in my favor, maybe because I was a child, but also because I had more privilege than the people I was comparing myself to. So the recommendations for myself as I go into the field and for any other person conducting research within similar context or in a similar area is to bear in mind the ethical considerations, anonymity where possible, where needed, and also bearing in mind informed consent and asking yourself questions about what it really means that they are informed about what your research is about and that they have given their consent, because sometimes a yes does not necessarily mean a yes. Embrace uncertainty. I set off going to the northern region to find cases. I ended up in Salada in the Savannah region, and that's actually where I found cases, which was not in my plan from the beginning. So it happens. And so when you let go and you can enjoy the process all through. So this has been my experience. And as I go into the field, hopefully next month, November, I bear all these in mind. And yeah, thank you for your attention. And I look forward to your comments and the discussions. Some references. Thank you.
Before I move on to Apiwa, I just want to check if Latifa and Marinu, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, please forgive me. If you're online for us. Okay. Okay, so then we'll move over to Apiwe. Are you here? Can we see you, please? Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. If you could please just introduce yourself, your project, and then you'll do your presentation, and then afterwards, since it's only two of you, we'll have the questions after your presentation.
All right, thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Apiwe Ndlogo from the Nelson Mandela University, currently reading towards my PhD in social work. I am a native African. I speak isiXhosa. And here today, my presentation is based on my frustrations with the academia. Thanks. Should I proceed? All right. Thank you. So thanks for allowing me the opportunity to indulge you in this presentation. And today I have rather a lot of questions than answers. And me presenting here today is also sort of looking for further guidance and sharing my thoughts and my frustrations, because at the moment, what I'm about to advocate for, it's nothing new. However, it's important that I emphasize it because often at times we are always required to translate the research excerpts or quotations into English to fit the norm, to fit the Western standards and conventions of academia. So just to give you a background of the study so that you have a better understanding of where I come from. So I'm a social worker by training, currently teaching social work at the Northwest University in the Vanderbilt campus in South Africa. And for you to understand that social work in South Africa is informed by colonialism and apartheid. And by the way, it was used as one of the tools in the manifesto by Verwoerd to promote apartheid and to make sure that South Africans are segregated. And it is against this backdrop that the study was initiated, because the overall study aims to co-construct an Afrocentric social work practice for relevance in South Africa. And the study attempts to answer the question, what are the elements of social work practice approach relevant to African social systems can be co-constructed? And the study aims, of course, to construct the social work practice approach, which is relevant to South Africa. So in the study, I had three sample groups. The first one was the social work practitioners. The second one, the social work educators, which are the lecturers across universities. And the third one was community members who have received social services. So those will be the clients and sometimes those who have received directly and indirectly services from social workers. And the study is framed from an Afrocentric lens to effect cognitive justice and epistemic freedom. And epistemic freedom is a battle for Africans to think, theorize, to interpret and write from where they are, free of Eurocentrism. And the goal of epistemic justice or freedom is to free reason from coloniality. Because at the present moment, in social work particularly, we still celebrate Verwoerd as the founding father of social work, and we still celebrate all the colonial heritage that came with this work that we are practicing in South Africa. So the research is framed from a critical research paradigm that is transformative. And that's why I found myself asking, why am I required then to translate the quotations? If this study is transformative and ought to bring social justice and address epistemic, freedom. So that didn't make sense for me. And most importantly, the study used participatory action learning and action research. So this simply means that with the participants, they became core researchers. So as the principal researcher as well, I was a core researcher. In the study, we participated through this cycle of research. So my ideas were not the ones leading the conversations, but the coming together with the research participants who subsequently became core researchers. We then undergone through a conversation and an explorative journey of designing and constructing how an Afrocentric social work practice could look like in South Africa. But that is not the main focus of the presentation today. I'm rather focused today on the issues of translation and language use within the research report itself. So some of the theoretical frameworks of the study, I have used Afrocentric lens or Afrocentric framework, which has helped us to contribute in terms of language justice and challenging the dominance of colonial languages in South Africa. And we use critical social work, which has helped us in challenging the dominant status quo and narratives and giving the indigenous African language the recognition it deserves for retelling African experiences. While the existential, Africana existential philosophy has enabled us to dispel of Black people as only producers of experience without knowledge and scientific knowledges. Because we all know that African knowledges have not been taken serious in the academia and have been thought, or rather perceived without the scientific base. So using the Africana existential philosophy has helped us to challenge that. And lastly, through the post-colonial lens, Africans were speaking for themselves and no longer spoken for or about, and they rewrote their story and retold their stories from the positions of Africans without other. As we all know, perhaps the quote from Chinua Achebe that says, "Until the lions tell their own stories, the hunter will always claim victory," or something like that. But this research was a dignity project, which was aimed at giving Africans an opportunity to tell their stories in their own language, within their own comfort, so that they can develop something that is meaningful and relatable within their social systems. So my point of departure for today is highlighting that translation is violent and that it imposes the values of the target culture and its language onto those of the source. So translation in South Africa, and particularly at large in Africa, has been violent and has bastardized our languages and has relegated our languages to nothingness, to unimportant, to unscientific. So then for me, it didn't make sense as to why would I be required or expected rather to translate while I'm doing an Afrocentric study that will contribute towards challenging the dominant status quo in South Africa, which is the Western social thought, and challenging, English itself as a medium of instruction in South Africa. So I must state that language is not just a cultural phenomena in which people find their identity, but most importantly, it is also a location for knowledge expression. So through language, we are not only identifying ourselves, but we are also highlighting our lineage. We are also expressing the knowledge that we have. We are also priding ourselves in the languages that we have as Africans and South Africans. So in Africa and South Africa, language was crucial in ensuring that Africans were colonized and their languages were erased. And if you follow closely the stages of colonization, the first thing that they did was to distract and deny us an opportunity to speak our languages and to embrace our culture. So language was deliberately taken away from Africans, and they were given English and the Western culture to believe in and to take forward and understand their own world via the West. So language is a crucial aspect of African identities and our worldview. Hence then, in the present study that I'm conducting, it's important for me to wage a protest against translation and wage a protest against English taking precedence and a prestigious position within the South African Academy. And I find myself asking, the question as to what extent does translation contribute to the superiority and inferiority complex among Black people? And this is a question I want the audience as well to ponder on. Perhaps when I'm done with the presentation, we can reflect on that as well collectively. And I'm asking myself these questions, rather, do indigenous languages express knowledge, or is English the only considered medium to express knowledge? Because so far in my training, we were largely encouraged to speak in English, to write in English, to always translate if something is in isiXhosa, so that it fits the standards or the norm of academia, which is Western. So for me, therefore, it was important that African languages be centralized and integrated into the development of Afrocentric social work within the research that I am busy with. Because for me, there's a relationship between language and humanity. Therefore, if we are forcing researchers and scholars to translate, we are largely contributing towards dehumanizing Africans. So by virtue of requesting a scholar, a researcher to translate information, we are telling them whatever they have with their home language or their local language is not important for academia, hence then translation, which is a problem for me. And I'm raising these points because history teaches us that the colonized people have been classified inferior, and their language was also relegated to nothingness. So the need to translate and conform to the standards that are set by the West then presupposes that inferiority to indigenous languages, which in this instance is isiXhosa. So there's linguistic relations of power, and then language in itself is used as a mode of holding power within academia. So in the study, I have used language as a mode of protest and language as a mode of resistance, because it is a high time that isiXhosa is featured in the scholarship of social work, and especially in developing and designing Afrocentric social work that is relevant within the African social systems. So the fundamentals of colonial conquest remain entrenched within the higher education landscape, and they continue othering, domination, and inferiority complex. So English has enjoyed a superior status. And unfortunately, I must be honest, English is an indigenous language in its context as well. However, when we speak about African languages, we always say indigenous knowledges, and then we hold English in a different position and in a higher position. Let us not forget that English has also an origin, and it is indigenous in its own context of Europe. So since language serves as both a means of communication and a cultural medium, so these two are inseparable. The language then conveys the values by which we define ourselves and the society. Therefore, language cannot be separated from us as people, cannot be separated from the society, from the culture of Africans. Hence, then, the collective refusal in the study that I'm conducting to translate the research codes or excerpts. So it is against then this backdrop that I note the standardization and conformist attitude through translation promotes epistemic genocide of the indigenous knowledge. And honestly speaking, if we continue translating the indigenous knowledges, languages rather, within the research that we are doing. We are still glorifying colonization. We are still glorifying the West because we are writing in our language or conducting researches in our language. But when it comes to now dissemination, we say we are making it or doing it for you, West, so that you have an understanding. But no one else thinks about our people on the ground in the squalor conditions of South Africa who are unable to read or write, that maybe they cannot comprehend, decode, or understand English. But we continue celebrating and glorifying the spoken language, which is English. So translation in Afrocentric research then negates the Black struggles and perpetuates inferiority complex amongst the Black people. I want that to sink in so that you have an understanding of where the position that we have taken with the core researchers that I'm working with, not to translate the excerpts. Because why is an Afrocentric research expected to conform to the standardization of language, especially English? Because if we are then translating, we are not true to the fundamentals of Afrocentricity, and we are not true to the critical research paradigm which informs the study, because it is supposed to be transformative and it is supposed to disrupt the current status quo in South African academia. So language should be at the center of reimagining Africa. Through this research, we are also reimagining social work in South Africa and in Africa, because the current modes and practice modalities in social work are not relevant to the current context that we are finding ourselves in. Local and African languages and knowledges are regarded as unscientific and require modification to suit acceptable Western norms and standards. And this is the reality of things which needs to change. Hence, then we are waging a protest and we are resisting the issue of translating the research quotations. So the protest to translate the quotation is a struggle to assert African identity power, since language continues to be used to silence the African people. And some of the comments, I attended earlier the year a conference, one of the comments when I declared that we are refusing to translate was around examination and passing of the PhD thesis. And then, which made me ask myself, we have dissertations and theses in South Africa that are written purely in isiXhosa, but they pass. But when it's social work written both in English and isiXhosa, then suddenly there's a question and suddenly there's a concern. So this tells me that the African languages are not taken serious within the academy, are further marginalized, and are not taken to be scientific. So therefore, this protest to translate the core researchers' excerpts should not warrant anyone undermining the intellectual rigor, epistemological sophistication, methodological soundness of any Afrocentric research. Because Africans have knowledge and have power, and their languages have the scientific base. So this is one of the quotations from the core researchers. I want to demonstrate through this quotation around the issue of protest of translation. So it reads as follows. That's so powerful, and there's something that happens to me all the time. I don't know how to best explain this. When anything is said in an African language, it is so deep, there's always that goosebump experience. I mean, even just when you say, there's just something deep, I don't know. There's something maybe that we will need to discover that connects us to these languages. I mean, I can say anything in English, but very rare does my body speak. But when you said that my body spoke, I even looked at my hand, I had goosebumps. It's such a powerful message that you said. I know that I will never forget that idiom. It's so powerful, and this is the knowledge that we have been made to believe that it's not intellectual enough. This is the language that our children, that the system is encouraging our children to forget. So I do not have at the moment the direct translation of Idlabe Saba. So imagine then if academia is expecting me to translate this language of isiXhosa into English. Firstly, it will lose the context, it will lose the meaning, and within the mood that this language was spoken. Hence, then it becomes important that whenever the researchers mention isiXhosa, it's important for us to keep it as it is. Yes, the discussion can be in English, but I am refusing at this moment to have any other attachments which are translating the research excerpts. So in conclusions, Africans have been made to believe that their languages are inferior and lacking an intellectual base. Africans are educated away from their languages by the Western system that prevails in South Africa and largely in Africa. So it is our ethical responsibility and duty to change the narrative and assert the African identity power in the academy through the language that we are advocating for. So thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Apiwe. And to Belinda as well, thank you so much. It's always important when we talk about methodologies that we consider ourselves as individuals and how our identities contribute to our investigation, to research, and also what all these normative ideas around languages do for in communicating our academic pursuits. So are there any questions online and in the room based on these two presentations? Any questions, thoughts? I have one question inside the room.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Suzeka. I'm from the University of the Free State. So thank you so much for these wonderful presentations, very interesting. I think I have a question for both. The first question is for Belinda. Interesting way of like you put your questions. I just wanted to find out at what point did you write those questions, because they're more like in the future, or like they sounded like you made them post data collection. I found that to be very interesting. So I just wanted to find out from you, the process of how you went through that. And also for the second presentation, thank you again. I struggle with this myself because my study is around indigenous, I mean, intangible cultural heritage. And a major aspect of that is language, but you find that, we're constantly using English. I'm from Zambia, and even when we have many other languages, English is the formal language, and we don't usually use any other language. But then I wanted to find out from you then what would be the way forward in countries like ours, for instance, Zambia, which has many languages. How do we work around that? And also you seemed to differentiate between Afrocentric research and just research, which then kind of is putting into these categories of just Afrocentric research. So you seem to argue that Afrocentric research is where we should use these indigenous languages, right? My question would be, should we try to use indigenous languages broadly in research and not limit it to Afrocentric research? And as people have been talking about this in the 3 days, I think there's that challenge of how do we really go into this Afrocentric university, if at all we should actually get there. So thank you so much both for the wonderful presentations.
Thank you. I just have 2 more questions inside the room.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, so my name is Dr. Isoken from University of Ibadan, Lagos, Nigeria. I'm in Ibadan, Oyo State. I think while we do African researches, we also need to be realistic about the challenges that we face, which is the problem of language. And to resolve this problem, it's going to be a lot of hurdles to go through. For instance, for a start, I'm talking to the second presenter, Apiwe, okay? So for instance, for you to really, you could have just blown our mind away and do this presentation in Sishosa, okay? Yeah, yeah, that's what you'd have done. And then again, if you had done that and had written in that language, how would we have understood? And yes, you ended your conversation with the issue of context when you were talking about when you say my body speaks. Okay, we need to understand the meaning of my body speaks and the context in which it's being done. Realizing the fact that those are indigenous words that needs to be explained. So since you don't have a dictionary in that language and you still have to do your training in English, I think the emphasis or the hammering on being against English may not be realistic. Thank you.
Thank you. If you don't mind, Apiwe and Belinda, there are 2 more questions in the room. Or would you like to answer the 2 questions first?
I think we can answer the 2 first so that we don't, have a lot to remember.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
All right. Let me start with the last speaker. I think in her landing point was around being realistic, particularly questioning or rather raising an issue around challenging English as a dominant language. So what I'm advocating for and what I am proposing is rather ecologies of language, ecologies of knowledge. It's not to say isiXhosa must be dominant, but it cannot be that English is dominant. I'll give you an example. In South Africa, we have 11 official languages. But when you look at the languages that are coming from Europe, which is English, French, Dutch, and Spanish, in these universities, all these languages, you will find them, they have their own distinct departments. So already this tells me that university as a migrated social structure from Europe was not made with a Black person in mind. And then you will have all these African languages and South African languages under one department, which will be given a title, African Languages Department. So that already should tell you that the African languages are not respected and are not given the dignity and the respect that they deserve. And in addition to the other questions, I think there was a question around should indigenous language be limited to Afrocentric research? And my answer to that is no. Hence, then I'm bringing now the conversation around ecologies of knowledge. When I say Afrocentric or Afrocentricity, particularly in developing knowledge and research, I'm saying Africans have their own modes of cognizing, have their own ways of thinking and doing. So they should be allowed to research within their own terms, within their own understanding. Europe should not dictate on how we engage in scholarship, on how we present our lived realities, because now we are being boxed to say, here are the research conventions. If it is not translated, then the dissertation is not going to pass, because you need to have examiners even, internationally. But then that needs to change, because English is holding this prestigious position within academia. So that needs a challenge. And failure to understand this is further erasing the indigenous languages. It is further subjugating us as Black people, African people within academia. And lastly, I think the other question was around what is the way forward? So the way forward, I will start currently with South Africa. We have language policies in South Africa, which are beautiful for the country, and language policies for higher education institutions. But whatever that is embedded within these policies is not practiced. So this is about time we firstly challenge those policies so that they become alive and they implement what they are stating. And in addition to this, we need to take ownership of our own languages and start writing, with our own languages. I'll make a quick example. I was searching on a social development within social work, and I saw a journal. It's written in Afrikaans, a journal article. And then I asked myself, why is it currently in South Africa within that particular journal, isiXhosa is not accepted, but Afrikaans is holding a prestige position secondary to English? So still we are being inferior and we are being dominated and oppressed within the higher education system. Thanks. I hope I managed to respond on all the questions. If not, please, Chair, remind me which question did I leave?
We will do so. Thank you, Apiwe. Belinda?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'll start with a question that was addressed to me. He wanted to know if this was the process or a post research thing that I came up with. So initially I indicated that I was looking for cases for my main PhD thesis. And then at the end of the process of the search for cases, I reflected on the process of searching for cases. And that's how come I was asking the questions about what were the activities, what were the factors that contributed to my field experience. And so that's how come I posed the questions that way. So it was autoethnography is used as a process or an end product of research. And I, in this case, used it as an end product. So we've been talking a lot about languages, indigenous languages. I just wanted to share some personal experiences here in Ghana, maybe beginning with even my own experience while searching for cases. So in the community where I went wearing a mask, the woman who drew my attention to it spoke in Dagbani, and I don't speak Dagbani. So she said something in Dagbani, but then I speak Dagari, and I recognize there are words that are similar. So for instance, in Dagari, you would say swabo, which means a witch. And she mentions this, and she said something to them, and they giggle. And she says, the translator tells me, she says, take off your mask. But her mannerisms and everything suggested she didn't just say, take off your mask. And the fact that that meaning was lost, I mean, yes, I'll take off my mask because the translator tells me she said take off your mask, but her mannerism and everything communicates something more than just take off your mask. And I think that is lost when we translate. So I do agree on that front. But like the Isokan said, yesterday in her own presentation, she mentioned that in Nigeria, there are about 250 languages. And she made a very important point, I think is relevant to our discussion today, about the fact that for the way forward, we would need to think about developing our own languages. So if you take your language, how are you able to express yourself? Even in Ghana, we have something called the NALAP system, where children from kindergarten up until primary school are supposed to be taught in their local languages. However, the languages have not been developed to be able to explain concepts to the children or certain specific concepts, which make it difficult for the teaching to be done in these languages. So yes, we should think about using our indigenous languages, but we should also reflect on how we, going forward, how we are expanding our languages to be able to communicate what it is we want to communicate, especially in the field of academia, starting from the little ones. So this is what I also have to share on what we've discussed.
Thank you, Belinda. We do have a question from Emmanuel. I'm going to take that first online, and then we'll come back to the room. Emmanuel, you can speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask my question and contribute at the conference. Anything I say is in regards to a few ways work which is on African languages, and I am much concern with some of the words he's using that Africans are being oppressed and so forth. For as much as African scholars as we are trying to promote our African identity. We are also trying to promote our African ideologies and African philosophies. But the thing is that we are, for some time now, emphasizing on decolonizing higher education. And even Afiwe himself stated that higher education is not an African idea. It's not an African concept, first of all, for us to decolonize. The thing is that the basis of higher education is knowledge creation. And if we want to do anything with regards to decolonizing higher education, the only thing we could possibly do as Africans is to make sure that we, as scholars, we are able to develop methodologies that can explain African context. The thing is that if you are to employ an European framework to assess poverty or socioeconomic status of people, the thing is that in the end, you render 99% of Africans as poor, because the claim is that about 80% of Africans spend less than $1 in a day, and that makes us poor. That does not make us poor if we are not poor if we are buying our organic vegetables and stuff for as low as we get it on the markets, as Europeans are not getting it that easy. So the thing is that higher education is just for knowledge creation. We have methodologies that have been developed over the years by European scholars to explain European context. So what we have to do as African scholars is that to first of all decolonize, we must start from the basis. Higher education is for knowledge creation, and you cannot create knowledge without the methodologies. So first of all, let us come about with methodologies that are able to explain to suit African context. In that way, we begin from there, we begin to create knowledge from our very own gardens, and then we push forward to replace them with the European methodologies, thereby somehow having some grounds in the higher education space. To me, I beg to differ that anyone is oppressing Africans in the higher education space. The thing is that most of our research projects are funded, and who is funding them? Our African corporate organizations are not funding much of the research we are undertaking here in Africa. Even most of our researches are funded by the European Commission itself, and so many other agencies from Europe. So you are being funded by an European agency. So in the end, the funder should be able to understand the data you are presenting. And that is one thing we face as a challenge. So I think it's time we advocate for our African organizations that are doing so financially to fund some research that promotes African language and some African philosophies. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. If I could just please ask the questions to be a bit shorter. I'm just being mindful of time. There were 3 other questions. You have 4 other questions? She already asked for you, and then sister.
My first question will go to Belinda. Thank you, Belinda, for sharing with us your interesting experience about your research, and particularly the doorway approach that you used. I'm interested in knowing how you handled those situations where you were not received, you were not allowed in, and yet you had already earmarked those destinations as areas where you would get information. Thank you. And the second question to, what is that name? Apiwe. I appreciate your stand on the issue of the African language as far as knowledge production is concerned. But I'm thinking in this era of liberalization or neoliberalism, where knowledge is now a sellable commodity, everybody who produces knowledge is interested in the number of readership that you are able to register, the way you are cited, and so forth. What would be your take in a situation where you confine your knowledge generated to a very small area because of the language that you have used? Would that be satisfactory to you? Maybe you could guide us. Thank you.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you very much. Oh,
Apiwe and Belinda, do you mind answering those two? And then I have, okay, we haven't asked, just to ask one more question in the room because it's related to the last question.
Thank you. Thank you, Apiwe, right? I would also interested, yes, we all agree that language is a vehicle. My name is Maureen Asimwe from Makerere University. And we also know that we are into the contemporary higher education issues. When we look at the contemporary higher education issues, we have internationalization, we have globalization. In that case, because for a research, I would believe for research to be recognized, to be productive, to be relevant beyond your own borders, it should be able, you should communicate it in a language that most people can understand. Now, if we are going to look at us using our African language, which I appreciate, and then we are not able to draw onto other borders, how far does that take our research? And then how does it become even relevant to those who are interested in our African research to build from that? I would like you to expound on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. If I can just push your thinking caps up here and Belinda, we have one more question. We no longer have that question. So if you could please answer those questions for us. And I think that will be the end of the session. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Chair, for the opportunity, and I appreciate the questions from the floor. I think the first speaker, it was not a question rather, but it was a disagreement of which I accept. And in my acceptance, I want to encourage and challenge the colleague that spoke to perhaps engage further on these concepts and these realities. I'm saying engage further. I remember yesterday, Pedro Mzileni, who's in attendance in person there, spoke about the university as a factory because it produces people for labor force. But you see, that is far from the essence and purpose of a university. Universities ought to contribute towards building society, towards social good, towards social justice. But of course, we exist or we find ourselves in a neoliberal context within the world. Then the universities are just machines producing other machines to service the industries. That's why it is at the moment. And I want to say, university is a migrated social structure. I want to emphasize this point because it is not of African origin as it is or as we know it. Peter Ake writes about this and reflects about this university as a migrated social structure and lacking the relevance within the. Hence, then you find a lot of other colleagues, would have questions when we say, let us speak our languages, let us write our languages. Because English, we were taught to read, to write, to converse and engage in English. English is indigenous in its own context. Yes, I understand the issue of internationalization and all that, but English was developed and there was a program, there were structures, and there was an intention to develop English to be superior. What is stopping us as Africans to develop our own languages? And why are we concerned about other people not understanding us? Because those people are not interested to understand us. I'll make an example. It cannot be that in South Africa, and I go to the other parts of the country, I stay there for a year or two, and I cannot converse in any of the local languages, which then tells me that I am better. So that is what is happening currently in academia. English is finding itself to be better. Unfortunately, as Africans, we have to meet via English in the present moment. So we need to challenge ourselves as much as we are asking these questions, that we need to develop our own languages, our own education in terms of now knowledge production in the ecologies of knowledge. I'm not saying let us replace English as a medium of instruction, but I'm saying it needs to exist within an ecosystem or ecologies of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start with a question that was addressed to me. She was asking what I did after I hit a roadblock. So for one particular case I would use in response to your question, the woman was not willing, the founder of the NGO was not willing to give me information to gain access to the farmer-based organizations within their network. However, she does not own, as a gatekeeper, she was doing her work, but she does not own the farmer-based organizations. And so going through her as a doorway to access the information I needed was not possible. But there were other doorways, such as the Ministry of Food and Agriculture list of farmer-based organizations. That's going to be a longer route for me, but it was an option. Or speaking to other individuals I knew who also work within the NGO space, within the network or confraternity of confederation, of farmer-based organizations. That's how come I was eventually able to gain access. So that door was shut, but other doors were open for me to get through. And maybe to add my final thoughts to the discussion about indigenous languages, I think it really goes back to the whole point of being intentional about developing our languages. One time in class, so in the University of Ghana, we often have a first year of lectures before we begin any research. And one issue that kept coming up in our discussions and in our one of our courses was this idea of developing our indigenous languages and thinking of the fact that maybe because we are not also intentional about using the languages, that's also how come we are losing them. So beyond using them, even now we are in academia talking about indigenous languages, but at home, some of you already have children. How many of us are intentional about speaking our local languages to our children? We prefer to speak English sometimes, at least that's the case in most homes in Ghana. So right from there, the children are growing up in their own communities, speaking English rather than English in addition to their local language should be fine, but English alone, and some of them cannot even express themselves in their local languages. So it's yes within academia, but even beyond academia, it's broader. We have to think about at the local level, how are we engaging with our languages? And then in terms of developing them, intentionality comes in as academics to write about these, to write in these languages. I like that he mentioned, because in the African Studies Department of Institute of University of Ghana, it's encouraged. And you have some students choosing to write their exams, for instance, in their local languages. But they do come face to face with a lot of challenges because of the limitations of the expression of the language simply because we haven't been intentional enough about developing them. So yeah, it does begin with that intentionality, and maybe as academics taking it up like Apiwe has, to delve deeper into these ideas that we have shared, and actually go back after we have done all the talking to the drawing board and take action. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Belinda. Thank you so much, Apiwe. That's it for the presentations. We really appreciate your time and sharing your research with us, and to everyone asked their questions. We're now going to start the World Cafe reflections. Terry, Kiamo, Apiwe and Belinda, you're also welcome to stay with us if you'd like to participate in some form. Terry, Kiamo, over to you.
Thank you so much. Am I audible in the venue and online? Thank you. And hi, to introduce ourselves, let me perhaps start. We started on Wednesday, of course, with the World Cafe concept and introduction, and then the practical example. And yesterday we had a first parallel session to reflect on the kinds of on the methodology and the kinds of questions that we were considering and that were generated. Just as a short recap to everyone, as you remember, the World Cafe setting is a methodology where generates collectively knowledge in a social constructivist kind of way, using a coffee or sitting together kind of meeting style in smaller groups, where then a particular question is being discussed. Unlike in, for example, in focus group settings, it is that several group meetings happen at the same time. We call them tables, and around each table there sit a number of people. It can be about 4, 5, or even more. And on every table there is a table host being appointed, which is not a researcher, but it is one of the research participants. The table host then introduces the questions and then as the discussion emerges after a set number of minutes, it can be up to like 20 minutes perhaps, discussing a question, then the table host remains and everybody in the table otherwise rotates to the next table, and the conversation continues there again, and the table host is able to share like what they have discussed with the previous group of participants, and so on. Now, connecting to, of course, what we've just discussed, for example, around positionality of the researcher, I think this way of operating, where it's not the researcher who is the table host, but where it's the participant, creates an interesting and different kind of dynamic, where the researcher is basically almost removed from the process of discussion and knowledge creation, unlike in a focus group, where researchers tend to be quite directive, to say like, okay, let's do it like this, or let's do it like that, or how about exploring this further. So positionality and the role of the researcher is very important. The other thing, of course, which was also raised, is that the table can have any question can operate in any language one is comfortable in operating. So, for example, if a research is conducted overall in English, right? Tables can have conversations in the language of the participants. At the end, it is the table host who has seen 2, 3, 4 groups of participants having rotated from one table to the next, who will be able to summarize? I think in our first short reflection that we had on Wednesday, Su-Ming made a very interesting comment when she was saying that what the table hosts tend to do in their reporting back is to do an implicit thematizing. With other words, the analysis is already being conducted in the process of doing the research, and it is done by participants themselves. So that is where we say the host's task is to convey the discussion to new participants, same or different questions can be discussed, and then so through this moving conversations, one can start to identify common patterns, and collective knowledge can emerge, and plans of action. So the beautiful icon here on the screen that is from Chiamo's presentation shows it is about setting the context, creating a very hospitable, very safe space, very friendly space to discuss and explore questions that matter. Everybody is encouraged to make their contributions, connect different perspectives, listening together for insights, and sharing in the end collective discoveries. So having said that, now some of the questions that we might want to consider in this reflective session could be about what do you think is the reason, and what may be some of the benefits of using this kind of method as against to, for example, individual interviews or focus groups or so, for approaching a research problem. May I hand for a moment over to Chiamo. Chiamo, do you want to elaborate? You are muted. You are still muted.
Yes, no, I needed to cough. I needed to clear my throat. So that's why I was a bit hesitant to participate. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for joining our reflective session. And as Terry had said, we have the question. So what do we think? What do we think? Can you please give us can we share our insights? Can we share our inputs? One of the most interesting inputs that was shared by, I think she's Esther. I think she's Esther. Please forgive me if you're not Esther and I have forgotten your name. But I think it's Esther who said that, linking to what Su-Ming said about the implicit thematizing by the table host. She also said that the participants themselves also take those themes to the table. So they also, when they go to the different tables, they also, take those themes. So what we need to now check is your experiences with regard to the World Cafe. Were you able to actually make those connections? How was the process? And do you see how was the process for you as both the participant? Some of you were table hosts, and how do you see it working? Most importantly, for this project of making sure that we as Africans decolonize what we use what we do best in order to study ourselves. That would be my question. Thank you. Any takers here?
Yes, we do. Just one question. Apologies, a response.
Thank you so much. From Wednesday, we are witnessing, experiencing major transformation. I won't speak personally, but I believe even other participants in this conference are experiencing the same. I was wondering what the World Cafe meant or was as a method. And from Wednesday, I took keen interest in learning, and I've really picked great interest in the method. When we started interacting and sharing our experiences about the question that we answered on Wednesday, I realized different groups had different perspectives. So that means, or that meant, if we had remained in one specific group and only listened to that, or the experiences only in that group, we probably could have missed out on the experiences, on the observations or perspective of other groups, other members who participated in the same conference or in the same workshop. So it's a very good method. And I would like to say, I think we need to realize that there is need to adopt these new researches that are going on. The process of sitting on a chair, having a single host, having a host leading, remaining there, but others rotating. I learned a lot, and I realized we learned a lot from other groups that we went through. So it's a very wonderful method, and I think it should be part of what we learn and what we share with other groups.
Thank you, Simon. We have another response? No. Would you like to comment, Kiamo and Terry, while everyone still gathers their thoughts?
I don't know if I can come in here.
Oh, Belinda.
I didn't have the opportunity to join on Wednesday and yesterday, but as he summarized the discussion from those 2 days, I just remembered that I emceed at an event. So this was not in an academic setting. I emceed at an event, and they had 3 tables with, so 3 different tables, 3 different themes, and had people move around. And I remember that it was called World Cafe. And I realized, well, as at the MC, because I had to summarize everything at the end of the day, I realized as I was also going around to notify them about the time and all that, the host could see certain patterns and themes coming up from the different groups, but also identify different ideas that each group had that were distinct from what previous groups had brought up. So yes, I haven't been there, but from my experience in a non-academic setting, I think this is interesting. And I'm actually now wondering if, I'm yet to go into the field, why not consider this as one of the methods for this could really be interesting. So maybe a question would also be, I don't know if you have shared materials with them that those of us who were not able to join could have access to. Yeah, thank you.
I have 2 more responses on the floor, if you don't mind, Terry and Kiamo.
Please, absolutely.
Thank you so much. My name is Lois from Makerere University. From Wednesday to today, when you talk about the World Cafe, I think we are not far from the Eurocentric approach. I don't think the cafe idea is our own African, but we are still operating within the Eurocentric approach. Therefore, when you bring in issues of languages, everything we are rotating is what? Being under the what? I could say perception of the what? The Eurocentric approach. That means as we advocate to have a uniform language maybe across Africa, we should know that we cannot bite the finger that feeds us. What does that mean? We must not detach ourselves completely to say we are on our own. We should operate within the what? A Eurocentric approach. We take what is good and leave what is not what? Good. Using the critical thinking that the what? The theme is impressing. That is my take. Otherwise, it is a good idea to have this kind of group discussions, the networking, but it is not African idea. We are still within the what? Colonial era. I submit. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your submission. Thierry, Kiamo, do you want to respond, or can we take two more from the floor?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So the last comment actually kind of introduces a theme that we were hoping to explore today, and that is for those who actually participated on Wednesday, or like Belinda had elsewhere an experience of participating in a World Cafe setting, World Cafe based research. What did you find about the method that felt foreign or imposed, and how would you think that there are ways in which one could do this method, one could change this method, adapt this method so that it does perhaps feel more like a setting that we are used to in everyday life?
All right, would you like to respond now, or shall we hold the responses? Would you like to ask a question, respond? You had your hand up. Yes.
Thank you, Terry. My name once again, it's Maureen. It's interesting. The World Cafe setting is interesting, and actually I was reading about it, I think adopted from it's supposed to bring in cooperative learning, right? Yeah. Myself, I think what I think would be, what should be included in an Afrocentric setting is for us, I would use Uganda as an example. We have what we call the fireplace methodology. It's conversational, but it's more, to us, it's more of Afro kind of, because we know that when we look at the fireplace conversations, these depict what happens in our societies before these other technologies came on board, where you'd have the elders sitting with the young ones, and then there is transmission of knowledge, exchanges, talking about what has happened over the day, and then maybe solving issues, and then getting a way forward for the next day. Now, when my colleague talks about the cafe as being a little Eurocentric, I think if we could borrow a few of those, I mean, if you take interest in what happens at a fireplace and then add it into the World Cafe kind of setting, I think in a way would have something familiar with African setting. I submit. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission, Maureen. We have one more question, response.
Okay, it's okay here. So in addition to what Maureen have shared, when having, like she said, the fireplace conversation, I would call it the town square, because that's more relevant to me. But the difference or addition would be when you want to have this conversation, you inviting the stakeholders, because there will be people who you think should have the answers to what you are researching for. So you find a way to have them in the conversation. So, and then like the hosts, you direct the conversation and hear people out. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I think Terry, Kiamo, I can give it back to you.
And can I also say
Yes,
something?
Belinda, please.
So, well, I was just imagining for my own research how this could work. So for the cases I found, I have a women's group that is into shea butter processing, and they are doing production as well. So I can imagine this in their normal everyday setting when, for instance, the group is about 30 members. So depending on those that I select for the research because of my inclusion and exclusion criteria, they could form, they could be the participants going around sharing their different ideas about the questions that are posed. And this could also be done with their own members so that instead of having to be there and have a translator translating everything, with the questions in their own language, their own setting being recorded, well, after that, then I can engage my research assistant to help with the translation. Because yes, we are talking about languages, but I'm doing my research in English. So yeah, that's what I have in mind.
Thank you, Belinda. I just want to check if online anyone has any thoughts, reflections. Okay. Kiamo, Terry?
Can I say something pertaining to the World Cafe seemingly being Eurocentric? Of course, we might see it like that, but there are elements. We are, as Africans, we have been people who are dialogical. People, as we have said, the fireside chats where we know children and the elders would sit. However, I would think that I acknowledge that our conversations, for an example, we have what we call a khotla. A khotla is where the king would call his people. I don't have a better word. Please allow me to say his people. To call his people to a meeting to discuss about a particular issue. And however, there would be power dynamics in terms of women are not allowed to enter the khotla. And also children are not allowed to enter the khotla. So the World Cafe minimizes those power dynamics in that it gives everyone who is within that particular space to actually share their views. So the power symmetries are just, eliminated by using the World Cafe. However, I do agree that we have always been dialogical. We have always been people who rely on dialogue to have our issues resolved and looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiamo. Are there any thoughts, comments, responses on the floor? We have one more on the floor just before I give it over to you, Terry.
Thank you. Maybe the concern that Kiamo talked about on Wednesday about ethics and the World Cafe. We need to also see how to explore that, being a qualitative method. We need to find ways of reducing the risks that could come with the information shared. Because maybe that could affect its adoption, its integration, its acceptance. So consider finding avenues of improving the ethical concerns that could arise. However, the benefits could outweigh the risks, but we need to continue reducing the possibility of ethical standards being violated. That is my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I believe those are all the thoughts and comments on the floor. Terry Kiamo, if you don't mind wrapping up fast, I'm just mindful for lunchtime.
Fantastic, great. Yes. May I ask if Dina is in the room, if she or online, if she would like to also just share her views, because I remember you were also there and Joe was also there. If you can please help us to bring this academy to a conclusion.
Oh, thank you so much, Terry. That's so generous of you. I think it's been really interesting to watch and see the potential, but also the difficulties. Hey, we've had, this has been, for instance, this session has so many people online. It is so well attended. In person, there's a decent group of people, but not so many. And it's been difficult to have the sort of challenging conversations and sharing and that we know is in the room. Everybody here has so much experience and online. So I think one of the challenges that just observing has been trying to do the World Cafe in a hybrid format, which I'm sure is possible. And definitely, I think everybody's probably learned so much, but so hard. And I'm wondering if that might be because trust building, time to sort of listen and respond, needs to happen in slightly different circumstances, you know? So it's been very good to see it. And I'm so glad that you guys have contributed despite the difficulties of bordering, right? That is driving all of us mad. So thank you. But this is just one observation that sort of I wanted to share, which I'm sure is very obvious to everybody, actually. Thanks, Terry. Joe, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you. I want to appreciate Thierry and Kiamo and the participants. I think these have been not the most ideal circumstances to have the World Cafe, but everyone has been calm about it. I think people chose to take the lessons and let the challenges slide. So for myself especially, this is a very, I got the kind of introductory understanding of this that I can further pursue perhaps at a later date. And I think a lot of people have probably got even more than I. I was only stepping in and out. I know I got personal training from Kiamo, in preparation for these sessions, but a lot of that was also flying, with all the planning around the conference. But I want to appreciate you for offering the time, waiting on us. It's a very different thing when you're online and some people are in person, different circumstances to navigate, but we've balanced it nicely. You've helped us balance this very nicely for everybody. So thank you so much.
Well, I think, thank you so much, Joe and Dina. Conversely as well, I mean, it hasn't been easy and there's been a lot of anxiety. Kiamo was supposed to be there and didn't get her approvals in time from the university. Hence, she had to miss her flight and cancel her accommodation and everything. I had planned from the start that I will not be able to come to Kampala because of the homophobic laws in Uganda. Even though I was assured that as a gay man, I would not be discriminated or thrown into jail, I do stand in solidarity with any LGBTIQ community members in Uganda who do not have the choice whether they want to live under an oppressive, discriminatory regime or not and face that. But it's been a good ride. Again, even in this session, the discussion we now had in the end again around the Eurocentric nature or how one could make a method more Afrocentric in its way, those are all really, really important conversations, and they link up with the other conversations I think that we had in this session. Because the question always is, are we starting, for example, like Chiamo now did, from a dialogical method that is indigenous? So, for example, the Lechotla, and we try and make it a research method that fits the knowledge creation purposes that we want to use it for, or are we taking a method that has been a research method that has been developed somewhere else, and we're trying to indigenize it, trying to actually make it fit this context? And so I think with Photo Voice, it was interesting last year because Photo Voice actually comes from Brazil via China to Africa, right? And so it is very much kind of a more of a global south kind of method. World Cafe, with this idea of the French bourgeois coffee place setting, is a little bit a different kind of, and again, we've been asking ourselves, how can one make that work? Belinda is already starting to think about that very much. I don't want to stand any longer between you and your lunch, but I want to just thank everyone, and also just as a kind of a operational announcement, we said there's going to be a certification later this evening. Joe is going to make an announcement around that, and to the online participants, everybody else as well who's on the WhatsApp group, it will be also communicated via the WhatsApp group. I don't know exactly yet what's going to happen, but we'll see what's possible and not, but definitely there will be a certification. It may only happen later though. We'll see. Joe is going to make that thing. Chiamo, your last words?
Thank you very much, Thierry. Thank you very much to all the participants, the organizers. It has been a wonderful process and a learning curve. We have never done the World Cafe online, and most importantly, we have never done the World Cafe the way it's expected to be done. So this was a learning experience, and I thank you very much. And for the participants, we are also going to send a survey to evaluate this whole learning process, but expect it on our WhatsApp group. Yeah, in a few, let me say a few weeks, so that I don't tie myself. Thank you very much to everyone. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Chiamo, Terry. Thank you so much to Belinda and Apiwe for their presentations on thinking through decolonized methodologies. Thank you to everyone on the floor for your thoughts, your comments. You've really helped to enrich the session. And I hope we all enjoy our lunch. Bye, everyone.